there's so much misinformation, and this is, as you know, so important, not just because of Assange, but because of what it means for us, for our kids, for the future of journalism. And I would question, the New York Times, the Washington Post had no problem publishing and commercializing and commodifying what Julian made available. And we don't hear anything from them now. And you would think that they would feel threatened for the future of what journalists are allowed to question. All of these trumped up charges and all of the hoopla, clearly is a very vindictive time right now, because it's not based on anything that's been proven.
Roger...
Congratulations for always being somewhere where mainstream media is not.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a disgrace, actually, that this is going on right in New York City. I see no one from the Times, Washington Post, anyone.
The Times was very gun-ho for that information when they could sell it,
right. I wanted to ask you, Roger made the point, and you don't hear this enough, that there's really no basis in law what's going on with Julian. Actually, the U.S. and the U.K. have an extradition treaty. In that treaty, it says somebody can't be extradited for political reasons. I can't think of more of a political reason than this. Julian has no real, he's just been in holding.
He's also not an American citizen.
Exactly. So
he's not guilty of betrayal of the United States.
Right. And also, this indictment was very overly broad. There was no actual evidence ever provided that he hacked anything or anything like that.
There's too many sentences for people to pass along. That's the problem. There's been, starting very strongly, obviously, with the DNC, because they were so angry about the emails, which I wish had been released during the primary, not waited till to the election. But all of this innuendo about all these loose things, the rape, all these things that were never proven, that were not even tried. But all that still lingers, and this is another thing that's so scary about this whole thing, is that once something gets out there, trying to get it clarified takes so much time that everyone's just going on clickbait and they have all these, phrases for a lot of people, that supposedly got Trump elected, that whatever. And it's so much easier just to go to that little bunch of short-term explanations than to actually understand what's going on. That's one of the problems. The other problem is what this says about journalism going forward. That anybody that questions anything, he's basically being prosecuted for asking questions.
Right.
Because I know that everyone says he hacked. He never hacked.
Right.
Obviously, that wasn't him. So what they've got him on is that he asked Chelsea Manning if there was anything more, which journalists... That's part of being a journalist, isn't it?
I've certainly egged on sources.
You've asked me questions. Yeah. So this says you're not allowed to ask a question, so somehow you're colluding or whatever. So what happens going forward if this stands? What does it say about our journalists? Was it Jim Acosta that Trump got mad and threw out because of a question? Everyone went crazy. Right. Do you remember that? Not that they shouldn't have.
A grave threat to press freedom.
Okay, so they were mad, and I get it, but this is so much bigger. And why is there such a silence about it? Where is the connection then between all of this media that they can't make this important?
Right. Well, you also mentioned that these cables and the information that Julian released, it was in partnership with the New York Times, The Guardian, Der Spiegel, I believe. So they, like you said, were very happy to do it. They
chose the material.
Right.
They went through them and chose them to make sure they weren't damaging to any civilians or the troops or anything else.
So Rachel Maddow at the time, because this was still a time when they were covering Bush and anti-Bush for good reason, they loved Julian Assange then. It seems that there's been a conflation now. They turned on him, the media, because of this 2016 stuff, conflation and distortion about, he was working with Russia, another thing that there was no evidence for.
But still no evidence for.
But I wanted to ask you, this actual 2011 release, the New York Times, all these outlets worked with him on it, yet complete silence. I mean, I literally just saw for the first time Kenneth Vogel from the New York Times, credit to him, tweeted something out saying this was dangerous. Can you kind of speak to the collective media I mean, they're opening themselves up.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This is the even bigger problem. That's really scary problem is not just if you like Julian Assange or if you want to go into his, but what it actually says going forward as a warning, as making a point to journalists of what it's the same with the Stephen Donziger case, you know, in terms of activists that deal environmentally or deal with lawyers that are involved taking on corporations. So this means that if we don't have, you know, if we don't have information, if we don't have journalists, how do we go forward? And this is a really scary, scary thing that's happening right now. Even aside from just what it means for Julian, the even bigger question is what just has me freaking out, because I just can't believe how quiet it is. You know, somehow also it has to do because of them being blamed for Trump or defeating Hillary, that's now you're on a red team or a blue team. And again, and this goes for everybody. This is, you know, it shouldn't matter if you're a blue or red state. This is just the truth. And when the truth is illegal, when you can't speak the truth, how do we know, you know, what's being done in our name? How do we, many years later, we find out about it? But in the meantime, all of these things, especially in terms of, you know, what Chelsea Manning managed to show in pictures of what was going on during that filthy war. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people that are watching this know all of that, so I'm preaching to the choir, but it's so frightening for me, the silence on the part of journalists more than anything, because I can't blame people. Have busy lives, they have their kids in school, and then there's COVID and all that stuff that's going on. It's hard to root out this stuff. There's not a lot of room for explanation. That's a journalist's job. They're supposed to tell you this is happening, this is important, you know. But we don't hear about it when it deals with minorities. We don't, you know, we're still not, Flint is just the same as what's going on in the Amazon and what's in Yemen. I mean, do we even...
8 years. They don't have clean water. No one's gone to prison.
You've covered that, but, you know, here we go again, because they don't have a strong enough voice, because it's not seen to be a priority. So we depend on journalists, you know, we depend on... People turn on their TV and it's just on a loop of misinformation.
And lastly, you know, there's a large swath of the internet now, and resistance, whatever, that kind of blame you for the financial crash, you know, everything.
I think
Donald Trump
responsible for World War II.
Oh, okay, that's a new one. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, there seems to be a contradiction, because they're very afraid of democracy, which I don't even know if we have one. Democracy is a threat because a lot of the right-wing threat, and there certainly is a growing conspiracy and white supremacy movement in this country. But they don't see the contradiction. Biden, on the same day that the UK court overruled the original judge, he was holding a democracy summit. Nobody seems to see, other than maybe people who think like you and I, they don't see a contradiction between Biden and the Democrats worried about white supremacy and that kind of stuff, but they don't see a contradiction with the threat to our democracy with Julian Assange.
How can they see that when they're being fed all this misinformation? How can you expect people that aren't curious or don't have someone to say, but there's this information? I mean, I have friends who are like, well, I don't know where you're getting your information from. And you say, well, it's not an opinion. These are not opinions. These are facts. Well, I don't know where you're getting your, you know, we go back, we're at a time now where the truth is, people just doubt every source. And that's part of what's happened with COVID. And I don't blame them for doubting. Who believes the pharmaceutical industry? Nobody. But, you know, then you have to go through and find science and look at statistics. So that's a lot of work. So people get on teams, you know, and anything that crosses between the two teams, people can't process because they've been trained to think red or blue and nothing in between. And I think that, so anyone that has a voice, I'm not an expert on things, but because I do have some information and a way to get information out. That's all I do. I'm just a little flashlight that's, you know, on information that people aren't getting. If it gives people a voice in the Amazon to know what's happening with Stephen, then I feel it's my responsibility to be able to put it out there when I know it's true, when I, you know. So that's what we have to do. We have to get information out, and we have to ask journalists to, but it's hard because if your salary is being paid, it's like politicians that are all bought, you know. I mean, I was on a show once, morning show, and it was in the lead up, it was during the early days of Iraq, and I was there talking about a movie or something, and when we were off camera, I said to the interviewer, you know, do you know Paul Rykoff? He works with the veterans. Maybe you should find. This was before all the scandal of what was happening to the veterans, right? She covered her mic and she said, keep asking those questions. We can't do anything. We can't do anything. And this was way back then. That was so terrifying for me, you know. So God bless you for asking the questions. I hope you stay out of trouble.
Well, I'll say, to wrap it up, over the summer, the fall, and now the winter, I've seen you at almost everything I've covered, and I haven't seen these corporate outlets we're talking about in any of it. You're talking worker strikes, you know, the coal miners that came up from Alabama, you were there. You know, protests
so many
out.
Strikes now. I mean, we have to support, you know, Kellogg, and I mean, there's a whole list and places where you can send $10 or whatever also to help them go through. But the miners are still out. I hope Kellogg does. It sounds like they're digging in.
Well, I was going to say, for all the grief you get, you're basically at more things than the corporate press is. So credit to you.
I guess that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it.
Good to see
Absolutely.
you.
You too.